Thank you for joining us for another Hagley History Hangout. My name is Gregory Hargreaves, Assistant Director of the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, as you know, during these history hangouts, we like to bring you some of the great work being done by folks who have used the historical collections held in the Hagley Library, especially scholars who have received support in the form of research grants and fellowships of different kinds from the Hagley Center. One such scholar joins us today. Grigorios Antoniou is a PhD candidate at the University of Athens in Athens, Greece. Grigorios, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Let's start by painting with broad strokes, so to speak. What is it you are researching and writing about?
Of course. So the research project that it was conducted at Hagley, it is titled Forging the Global Industrial Network, International Industrial Conferences from 1957 to 1997. It's a joint project with Professor Rawlings from the University of Glasgow, and we aim to explore the role and the impact of these conferences that occurred in the reference period. And our study delves into the significance of this conference as platforms of knowledge dissemination, collaboration, and policy formulation. We examine how these conferences facilitated the spread of innovations, but also how they formed informal and informal industrial networks through participation in these conferences. And what are these conferences? It was, I think, yes, 70 years ago in 1957 was the first conference. It was organized by Weldon Gibson. He was an economist and a long-time executive at SRI International, previously known as the Stanford Research Institute. And they lasted about 40 years. So the attendance was restricted to CEOs and was by invitation only from US companies, but companies from the free world, the free known world back then. So as many as 80 or 90 representatives from countries all around the world participated in these conferences. Each conference centered on two critical topical themes chosen to interest a large set of international executives about topics that were really important during the post-World War II era. And our main focus is to gather information about the participants of this conference and what they discussed and what was their opinion based on their background, both business, but also their ethnical background, like from which countries they arrived and which countries they represented through their firms, and what were their both business and political points of view in the industrial strategies. And the first part of our analysis is about their building a database with biographical and demographical information about, for example, where did they, about their ages, when they were born and when they died, in order to find any trends in demographical trends about the participation of industrialists and their origin, their education, their business background, and also if there were any other elite networks that orchestrated their participation in these CEOs.
Well, before we get into the weeds, so to speak, could you perhaps zoom out a little bit and explain what was the purpose of these industrial conferences in the first place? What were the organizers hoping to achieve by this?
Of course. So the Stanford Research Institute, at first, the official purpose of these conferences was a general one, stimulating economic and industrial development in the free world. That was the purpose of creating these conferences. But through the archival research of the materials, we tend to find also other purposes of these conferences, completing and also contradicting the main purpose. For example, the creation of elite industrial networks, it's really evident, but they are not stating that because they have the program of these conferences, as we have found many programs in the archival collection of Hagley, in the rich archival collection. These conferences were categorized in many, how can I state it? There were many sections of these conferences. For example, there were public speakings. There were executives that they were giving public speeches. Also, there were private groups that they were organized by country or by business domain. And it's really difficult to find what was discussed in the private groups, but we are trying to gather as much material we can find in order to reshape all these meetings.
Well, what were some of those themes under discussion at these industrial conferences?
Perfect. As we're researching the post-World War II era, there were really critical, crucial discussions about inflation that occurred in international commerce, also the relations with communist countries. If, for example, we see at the end of the 90s, the last two conferences, they are inviting members from the socialist and communist countries to join them in these discussions, in these business discussions. And in the former years, they are asking questions about how they should formulate their business strategies with the capitalist countries, with socialist and communist countries. And there were various points about environment, how the industries affect the environment, and how they should regulate the market in terms of pollution and also exploitation of resources. This kind of topics were discussed during these conferences.
What types of firms and industries were sending representatives?
There were all kinds of companies. For example, there were companies about energy and source, energy power companies. There were coal companies, companies, chemistry companies that they had. How can I? That their business sector was affiliated with chemistry and chemical projects, and banks, a lot of banks that participating from the banking system. They were covering all the business sector in international terms. Finance companies, construction. Yes, but we, through the statistical analysis, is through the statistical analysis that we have conducted thus far, we've seen that the majority of the companies that they were participating, they were US companies, and the next ones were companies from Great Britain, and then it's all around the world. And it seems that they were trying to build connections with companies from abroad, and that this is, and in this way, it is explained that the majority were US companies, and they're trying to formulate connections and business relations between companies from the US and Europe, Africa, Asia. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned the formation of an elite industrial network internationally, and that being one of the purposes, but certainly one of the outcomes of the industrial conferences you're describing. How are you analyzing that network effect?
Sorry, could you repeat the last sentence, the last word?
Sure. How are you analyzing the network formed across these industrial actors during these conferences?
Sorry, I think I didn't get the question.
That's okay. We could skip right over it. Let's get down to sort of into the nitty-gritty of the subject. What was it in the Hagley collections that you accessed? What materials did you find?
Okay, there were a lot of programs of these conferences where we found analytical material about all the participants, who gave the speeches, executives, scientists that they participated in order to advise on critical topics. We found catalogs and lists of membership to these conferences, which is they were really important for our research because with these catalogs we can draw data that will help us build the database and find out the bigger picture of who participated finally at these conferences, and also examine the frequency of participation, because there were CEOs that they started and they participated in more than 5 or 6 conferences through a period of 20 or 30 years. And also find out if there was really an impact of these conferences, to see if a network was built or not, if the discussions that they took place in these conferences had an impact on the international industrial policies. The collection of Hagley was really rich, and and the research is progressing really in a positive way. And there were, let me think of the other materials that we found. Correspondence was really important. Correspondence between CEOs and also the organizers. And it was really the whole organization of these conferences was perfect, really in detail. They were communicating with fellow partners of business partners or friends from companies from the US or Europe, and they were also inviting their spouses. There were galas for the members, also for the spouses, and they were really trying to build like a family business environment. And we have all these invitations, a lot of invitations at the Hagley archives.
It seems like a really rich trough of material.
Yes, the correspondence is really rich, and we can see also the status of the members. Members arriving by helicopter, like a helicopter waiting for them at the New York airport, and then somebody picks them up in a helicopter and flies them to California, where the conferences took place. We can see the relationship between friends and friendships that they had been created through these conferences. People that met during that time, and then continued being friends and also business partners. And this is why the network assumption is really strong and evident, that that the conferences had an impact on creating an international industrial network.
And sustained connections between these people.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's really fascinating because the emergence of business diplomacy as an established field of study has primarily revolved around research concerning multinational corporations and national governments. There is a notable also nevertheless there is a notable exception to this trend in the work of David and Achenberger in their published articles and forthcoming book on the International Chamber of Commerce. But the international framework is understudied in the context of international industrial strategies and networks. And here comes our research and on the conferences to fill the gap and see how they work and how they influence the world, and if they influence the world.
I know the work is still underway, but do you have any preliminary findings about the demography, the demographics of the participants, and any patterns therein?
Yes. We have a few preliminary results concerning the age of the participants. Someone would think that participating in a conference would be not a waste of time for businessmen, because businessmen are really they really value their time. Time is money. So someone would think that only young members of the company, young members of the board would spend the time to travel to California from Africa or Asia, but that's not our case. Presidents of companies from all around the world, or the CEOs and members of the board, they are the ones that they're traveling in order to participate in these conferences. So we see people in their 50s mainly participating in the conference, which means that they are already established businessmen. And a research question would be that the goal of the conference is to attract successful people in order to promote the ideology and also the fame of this conference. And in order to build a social network, you need people in power. That would be a first assumption. Also, concerning the country participation, as I've already told you, USA and Great Britain are the key players, but we also have participants from, and then follows Asia and Africa, but also Australia and Latin America. Europe is really strong in concerning the participation, and we have like we see that the biggest companies of that era, from the domain of telecommunication or production, food production, commerce, they are from all the European countries are there. Like for example, I'm interconnecting this research with my PhD project, which is the Athenian industrial elite. And in the catalogs that we found at Hagley Archives, I located Greek industrialists taking part in these international conferences, and they were certainly from the elite groups of the Greek industry. I think these are the primary results that we have thus far. But the material is really rich, and we are still trying to go through it. And it's really interesting to see the outcome.
Well, this is just a really interesting project, and thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us.
Thank you very much for your invitation and your time of hearing it.
Oh, you're so welcome. And for the audience, if you would like more Hagley History Hangouts, more information on the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library, join us online. You can visit hagley.org. That's HAGLEY.org. Don't be a stranger.